Hope you enjoyed that tantalizing moment. What you just saw is basically every Whirlwind Barb's dream scenario. What's up, everyone? My name is Snoo, and I've been playing Whirlwind for quite a while. Ever since about level 70, I'm level 100 now. I've had a chance to min-max a character. Yes, you kind of have to min-max a character to get numbers like you saw on the thumbnail. Or in that opening scene, if you paused it real closely, you will see a crit for over 3 million damage with Whirlwind. Might not have seen that before. How was it achieved? Why was it achieved? We're going to be getting into all that today. I'm going to start by just kind of talking about why I made the build and what kind of sets it apart from most Whirlwind builds. We'll get into the stats. We'll look at some of the damage buckets because that's going to be particularly interesting. You'll learn a lot of information if you're not, rock solid on your understanding of how the damage is calculated in this game. Definitely, you might even want to skip to that part in the timestamps because there's definitely a lot to learn there. I decided not to come out with this video until I had the character completely min-maxed and had a very good understanding about the damage buckets. I definitely don't know everything there is. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and anything you see in the comment section below, that's cool. I have a link to the build, although I couldn't figure out how to do stat priorities, so you're just going to have to kind of follow the video format for that. But there are some links in the description. There's timestamps down below. And we'll do a little bit of a showcase in Iron Hold, which is where the footage came from that you saw, and it's kind of, I think, the best place to do this build. So, this build is a Whirlwind build with a real big mace, two-hand mace, for stuns and higher damage. No bleed. That is definitely one of the biggest things that's setting this build apart from anything you might have seen is 0 bleeds. It's also featuring ground stomp, and it has some disadvantages. This build is at least 10% meme, I would say, because in my opinion, the slasher build, the two-handed sword style that allows you to use things like Imbiber and the Paragon unique chest. If you're a Whirlwind Barb, you probably, and at the end game, you probably know what those are. That definitely produces a much more fluid and easygoing play style where your shouts are up much more often. We kind of have to deal with some shout downtime with this, but the payoff is huge crits, baby. So a worthy payoff if that's what you're into. And that's what I'm into right now, so let's go ahead and go down to Iron Hold. I'm just going to do one, general showcase of the dungeon. I think this is a decent strategy. You've probably seen Iron Hold advertised by some people talking about, especially like rares or legendaries per hour. There are 2 enormous elite packs that exist in a way after recent dungeon balancing. This doesn't seem to be the case in the vast majority of dungeons anymore, but Iron Hold still has intact so a couple, 1 or 2 elite packs that are insanely, like 15 elites or something like that in one pile. And they're at the back of the dungeon, so that is kind of the downside. Maybe that's why the dungeon wasn't rebalanced in a way so that you could no longer do that. The front half of the dungeon is not very good, but it is what it is. So you can kind of see that even when I'm not really focusing on cooldowns, these Whirlwinds are hitting pretty hard. Let me see if I can actually hit something kind of hard here. Oh yeah, the jailer takes less damage, right? Alright, so I got the key, and the first half of the dungeon almost done. It is a very short dungeon, so it's not too bad. I'm curious as to whether this dungeon is actually better than any other dungeon in any one specific category. If it is, it would probably be like legendaries per hour or something like that. But anyway, I got the worst midpoint spawn, the one that forces me to stay in here for 30 seconds. By the way, in case you don't know, like none of the monsters here give EXP, at least they didn't the last few days. And you keep spawning like tons and tons of elites. It's kind of fun. Go through here and kill these, but that you get like no loot and nothing special anyway. But anyway, I mean, we can kind of see some damage for demonstration points. We can kind of see some stuff. Some big numbers come out. 1.7 million, 1.4 million. It's easy numbers right there for this build. And I come down here. And I may or may not have Wrath up when I hit. I'm actually going to not hit that shrine just so, you know, and kind of show you guys a little more authentic gameplay. Oh, we're not going to do that. And back over here, this might be one of those maps that only has one pack of monsters. There they are. There's the big pack. Well, it's not the biggest pack. But anyway, you can see some 2 millions, 1 million's easy going off there. And you'll notice that everything dies really fast. It helps when everything is vulnerable immediately for 3 seconds, and that is kind of the crux of this build. I probably wouldn't have gone ahead and done this if it wasn't for the glyph exploit that allows you. And I think about what type of content this is tailored for. It definitely, the initial impression or your initial thoughts might be, well, this is going to be a really good in-game build because you do so much damage. Actually, no. I think the downsides are a little too punishing, especially with the shouts not being up quite as well. And the best thing to do with this build is to run with some easier content. Okay, we do get the second one. Well, good. We'll kind of see a little bit more of a showcase. I had no Wrath up the second time, but that's okay. I did plenty of damage, at least in a normal dungeon, right? So, there you go. That is just a run through. And you know what? I even usually pick up Sacred Gear. So if I'm kind of trying to do gold per hour or legendaries per hour or ancestral gear, it's alright. I know ancestral gear drops more often in Nightmare Dungeons, but, you know, especially right now, we can't teleport straight to them, and you can't get exactly the best dungeons every time. So it's still really nice to run regular dungeons. We'll mess with selling that stuff later. Let's start here when we're examining the build with some of the stats. So I think this is going to be, you know, very big deal for anyone who is a little wishy-washy on how the damage buckets work. You can type Diablo 4 damage buckets into Google and you'll come up with a nice sheet that kind of shows you. But long story short, critical strike damage is its own multiplier. Vulnerable damage is its own multiplier. And then basically everything else that shows up on here is going to be a package deal. So damage versus something, damage while something, damage with something. They're all condensed into the same bucket there. And then we also have strength, which will be its own separate multiplier too. And strength is actually a very, very good stat for the Barbarian. Like, you know, obviously strength would be more tuned to the Barbarian, but in certain games, you know, strength might be, you know, give you such and such player power for your warrior class or barbarian class. I think in this game it's actually really strong. A lot of armor, which is really good, and then since there's so many different damage buckets, strength being its own one, very, very powerful. So anytime you can get more strength, you know, I went out of my way to get more strength even on this chest, for example. Very useful for that. Overpower is not going to really play any role in this build. It's a mechanic that's kind of weird, doesn't work too well. Anyway, but we can see critical strike chance is 41%, pretty high. It goes up much higher, of course, with the Whirlwind aspect. And then critical strike damage being actually insane, 600%. Vulnerable being very high, 362%. And the collective of everything else is, I don't know, we're looking at something like 800% maybe. Somewhere in that neighborhood. No, maybe 900%. Yeah, and then we have damage reduction, and of course one of the downsides, the way I've made this character, I have made it a bit glass cannon-like, certainly in comparison to what I could do. Perfect example of how this character is more glassy than it could be is I have removed any and all defensive legendary aspects, including the one that gives you armor, percent increased armor, up to 50% armor, in favor of more damage or more speed. This is a very fast character, a lot of cooldown reduction, berserking duration bonus, movement speed is very high right off the bat, elite kill movement speed is pretty good, a lot of fury generation. It is very much min-maxed on the power side of things, and that's how you get kind of some of the numbers you saw on there. So there is just a quick overview of the stats, and hopefully you can kind of understand. We'll be looking more into where the damage is stacking up, but basically, last thing I'll say on the whole damage buckets thing. Essentially, there's 3 different ways that damage gets calculated into the game. One is it just fits into one of these buckets and it's additive. Like, you know, I'm getting the damage while fortified from, I believe it's the, what is it, the Undaunted one. So I'm forgetting which glyph it is. Yeah, Undaunted. So I'm getting 60.2% damage while fortified. So while I'm fortified, if I start Whirlwind while fortified, because Whirlwind snapshots most of its damage, at least not conditional with like a while modifier on it, it's going to be additive. And this just gets kind of thrown into the bucket that way. On the complete opposite end, which with many of the legendary aspects, we have something that just gives us straight up damage. And if it doesn't have any sort of conditional thing, like it just says deal up to 20% increased damage, and then like everything else is just some gobbledygook that is, yeah, it's conditional, but it's not saying like versus or while or with especially, then it's its own multiplier. So these gloves, the imprint there, is giving 20% more damage, especially Path of Exile players will understand that lingo. More DPS, 20% up to. If I start Whirlwind with full resource cap, 20% more damage. And the same can be said for, you know, this one right here. Each point of fury you generate while at maximum fury grants your core skill 60% more damage. So especially with the X there, the X is a big indicator too. But the X doesn't tell the whole story. So the X may also, the modifier or the damage multiplier may also embed itself in another additive multiplier. I'll give you a perfect example of that, final example here. So this is kind of the third way that the multiplier may work. Take something like this, Unbridled Rage. Core skills deal 135% increased damage, but it has an X there. So it is additive within the damage bucket of core damage, but it's multiplicative scaling itself. So any other core skill damage rolls, like all 4 of my weapons, which I went out of the way to get core damage, made this increase unbelievably high. So I'll show you just how insane this is. So the thing is, Unbridled Rage is not actually all that super special. It's really good when early in the game because it's just straight up 135% increased damage, and if that's, you know, if you're kind of not getting a lot of damage in that damage bucket, that's a big deal. But Unbridled Rage is not actually very good if, for example, you have all kinds of increased damage from other sources and you have like 0 from core. So if none of your damage increases from core skills, suddenly it's not that good. Let's see if I remove this. Now the number will be all the way down to 158. Can you believe that? Look at that. That's pretty crazy. 506. That's how much it increased my damage. It scaled it up on this. So again, Unbridled Rage synergizes incredibly well with any other sources of core skill damage because they're multiplying all that core skill damage within itself. So very important to understand that. All right, so that's kind of it on how the stats work and help you kind of understand a little bit about how I'm getting so many multipliers. Let's go over some of the gear here. We'll look at the legendary aspects exclusively right quick. You're going to notice they're almost all strictly damage oriented. Of course, this one's a quality of life. It feels kind of dumb to run Whirlwind with no pull. You're doing any kind of dungeon content, of course. So Helmet's a good place for that because Helmet is, shall we say, the most defensive slot that can still wear Whirlwind, Helmet and chest. For the chest or the helmet, we'll also be extending duration of berserking. This is probably the least important legendary aspect that I have. Now this goes pretty well with berserk ripping, and I have seen Rob use this on his to try squeeze bleed in there, but I felt like the synergies with bleed were just so poor that it wasn't worth it in my case, especially if you're over prioritizing damage. Then the gloves I already showed, so this is a 20% damage multiplier. Temerity is used. Temerity, as far as pants, are really good when you're doing lower level content, which I think this build is better for. Again, like 10% of a meme. Part of that being, don't recommend this for higher tier content. Low level Nightmare Dungeons can do fine, but any kind of pushing thing, no. I'm shooting myself in the foot by having almost no defense in this build. Yeah, even with 10k life. Temerity The purpose of Temerity, it really is just one thing, and that is to get barrier up almost all the time. So there is a legendary aspect that gives you barrier for 30 seconds every time you hit an elite. That's not up very often though, so it's not good enough. And the reason why we use that is for this synergy here, deal 25% increased damage while you have a barrier active. And there is no other sort of like damage bucket for this one. I know it says damage while, but this is its own special case. There are some special cases out there. This is indeed 25% more damage if you start Whirlwind with the barrier active. Again, I believe it's snapshotted as well. So even if you're Whirlwinding and you lose the barrier throughout the Whirlwind, you're still getting credit for that. 90% sure of that. Then boots, of course, we need the movement speed, and this is what's going to make us run at basically 200% movement speed at all times, even while Whirlwinding. I think at least with Berserk up. While Whirlwinding with Unstoppable and Berserk, I believe we are at 200% movement speed, or very, very close to it. And then we got, in the two-handers, we got two of the two most important damage multipliers, the ones that scale the most, or the most reliable at least, will be this one. This one's very easy to set up. Usually I have this in full power at all times. And then over here we got increased Whirlwind. Now, I have found some perfect Whirlwind aspects, but unfortunately I didn't have any. This was kind of one of the last items I got for the stat priorities being extremely good, and it's high item level, so I can use this sword whether I'm using a sword or a mace. We already looked at the barrier one, and now over here we have another damage one that is indeed 15% more damage, even though it has while. But at the end it has the X there. It just says increased damage, so that is 15% more damage while standing in an earthquake, which is kind of a small radius, to be fair. And it's only under ground stomp for 4 seconds. But, you know, we're going off the deep end to get as much damage as we can. Earthquake doesn't, the damage is negligible. It's in like the tens of thousands. Not that big of a deal. The last big damage one, which I think is kind of a cool thing about this build, is because we're going maces, because we're using ground stomp, we get a lot of stun. And so putting the stun on the amulet is a pretty good idea, I think, for 60%, up to 60%. This is the highest damage multiplier that will function with the amulet. Up to 60% increased damage against stunned enemies. This is kind of the difference between like 2 million crits and 3.2 million crits. So whenever you see a crit, if you see any content of this build right here, and you see a crit for over 3 million, this is responsible for that, getting it synergized with this. Ground Stomp seems to be a little weird or a little bit buggy in that sometimes it doesn't categorize it as stunned, but I did see an improvement to it after the recent hotfix, even though nothing was said in the hotfix, and I was testing it a lot before the hotfix. So if you're someone who maybe tested that before and you didn't see stuns being registered very well off of Ground Stomp, try it again. I do believe it works a bit better. Still doesn't seem to be 100%. Then we have a couple of rings, and this is just everybody's doing this. The shouts, yeah, the shouts are way too strong, or everything else is too weak. However you want to look at it, perfect aspects there. So that is all of the aspects in the legendary gear with only one unique. Let's go over the gear priorities themselves. So the gear is pretty min-max. I mean, by most people's standards, at this point in the game, this early in the game, this gear is pretty min-max. It's not absolutely perfect. The roll ranges are definitely not perfect. But I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about what is or isn't min-maxed. This is the part of the sort of guide that is not present in the link in the description, but there is a link in the description. I just couldn't figure out how to put the stats in there. So basically, we're going to want strength and cooldown reduction. Those are the two that we're really going to want. Max Fury is nice to have too. And then the last one is whatever. It could be max life, it could be percent armor, it could be all stats. Technically, it would be more DPS. But I just took max armor in this case. For the chest, a lot of options here. There are some strength options. There's damage with, or there are some offensive options. There's strength. There's physical damage. There's percent damage. There's damage with bludgeoning weapons. And then everything else is defensive. Actually, +4 ground stomp would be nice because it would reduce the cooldown of ground stomp by about 2 seconds. Would be kind of a big deal. And without the Rage of Haragoth chest, ground stomp is the longest cooldown between that and all the shouts. Damage reduction is nice, so this is kind of a defensive offensive hybrid chest. Pretty good chest overall. Then the gloves, The gloves do need to have high lucky hit. They should have high lucky hit, high crit, and +4 Whirlwind. The last one should probably be strength. I never did find gloves that well rolled, so I got willpower instead. Just gives some resource cost reduction. Not that great of a stat though overall, and it doesn't flip me over any other breakpoints I think on the Paragon rare nodes. Then temerity. Of course, you want the highest barrier threshold possible, but that's about it. The boots, definitely double movement with fury cost reduction, then either strength or berserking duration. I like berserking duration, especially nice with the aspect here with the chest as well. Then we'll go over here to the two-handed weapon. All 4 weapons are going to have the same one. Percent vulnerability, percent crit, strength, and core skill damage. Vulnerable, crit, and strength probably shouldn't surprise you. They are all 3 the ones exclusive to their own damage bucket. Core skill damage is not, however, because of Unbridled Rage and the exceptionally strong scaling through core skill damage, we're going to be going core skill damage anywhere we can. And so it is present on all 4 of these items. This is part of the min-max endeavor to get that. Some of the rolls are not that great, but they all have those 4 rolls. And, you know, you could do damage with against close enemies, but close enemies isn't very good with Whirlwind because apparently that even snapshots in and of itself wherever you start the Whirlwind, whatever is close to you at that time, that's the only, those are the only monsters that give you credit for close. So if you're Whirlwinding around, every monster you hit up to then, even though you get close to them, you don't get credit for close damage. It's something I learned at some point a while back. Damage against crowd controlled is not going to be very good. Stunned could work, obviously. I guess would be fine, but yeah, crowd control. Bleeding, no, we're not bleeding anything. Slowed, nope, not slowing anything. So it really does have to be core skill damage. Is the one clearly the best for more than one reason. Then for rings, kind of a similar story. Double crit and vulnerable, and the resource cost is probably the best. This is definitely the most offensive variation I think you can get with reasonable quality of life. Resource generation is a premium stat for Whirlwind, of course. And then the amulet, well, fury cost reduction, cooldown reduction, that should be no surprise. Then try to get whatever you can to give you more damage and or speed. I got movement speed and then +3 heavy-handed. Heavy-handed is really good. That is a multiplier to crit damage. That's one of the reasons why I have almost 600% critical strike damage, because I have 6 points in heavy-handed, which is very strong. So that is it for the stats. Let's go ahead and look at the skill tree. There it is, heavy-handed, 30%. All right, we'll start from the top. You're forced to take 2 points up here, even though we're not going to use them for anything. I mean, it doesn't matter what they are. A lot of people like Lunging Strike. I always liked Frenzy. Personally, I liked Frenzy with Combat Frenzy for any sort of basic skill generator Whirlwind. So if you're still kind of the early phases and you don't have, you're missing Imbiber or not Imbiber, sorry, you're missing Disembowel Glyph, you're missing the Haragoth Chest, you're missing the ring, aspects, the ones that are really good for shout cooldown and everything. You're probably going to be using a basic skill, and I recommend Combat Frenzy. But you can absolutely try Lunging Strike with Combat Lunging Strike, still very good. All points into Whirlwind and Enhanced Whirlwind, Violent Whirlwind for even more damage after a couple seconds, of course, and then 3 points Pressure Point because Vulnerable. We're going to want it up as much as we can, but we do get it up for free for the first 3 seconds. And again, I'm doing content purposely that is purposely killing anything in 3 seconds for the most part. So in a way, Pressure Point's not actually that valuable. But in the end, you know what I mean? Like something hits you and then it flees away or whatever. And any kind of bosses, that's going to be useful, of course. Ground Stomp here with Enhanced Ground Stomp and Strategic Ground Stomp. I really, really like Ground Stomp with swords or maces. Super good for reducing the cooldown of Wrath. A lot of fun, especially fun like if you ever get the Whirlwind pull and then Ground Stomp and you hit everything, just cuts in half your Wrath the Berserker cooldown. That is just so thrilling and satisfying when you're playing these builds. Rallying Cry, okay, Tactical Rallying Cry. I don't know a single build that doesn't do this. And then Challenging Shout. I have a chest that gives me 4 additional. But it's not too important there. And that's it. So a lot of builds are using Iron Skin. I think Iron Skin is definitely going to be the more viable option for really end game pushing stuff. And there's a great legendary aspect for Iron Skin as well. But for any kind of easy content or speed farming whatsoever, I don't see Iron Skin beating Ground Stomp at all. Except maybe with Gores, but I don't really like Gores personally, so there you go. Warcry has 5 points invested into it because more damage, baby. That's it. Any way I can get more damage. It's its own damage multiplier. So yeah, you can see it's got the 21% with an X, and there's no conditions there, so it's definitely its own multiplier while Warcry is up. We're going to be getting some of these points. These are pretty typical. People will quite often take 3 here, but that doesn't give me any damage, so Glass Cannon, not taking Guttural Yell. Aggressive Stance really is just for while berserking. I'm already getting the extra berserking uptime, so this is nice with extra Fury Generation. My shouts are down a little bit. It does actually have a bit of an impact here. And then +3 for the swiftness, movement speed, because again, don't care about defense, only about speed, movement speed, getting up to the next combat point. And even though I'm capped on movement speed pretty often, I'm not capped always, so these are valuable points. Sometimes I take Pit Fighter and things like No Mercy. I would get value out of these, but I just couldn't spare the points in that case. But I will go ahead and take Counteroffensive, which is almost as good as Heavy Handed, because it's kind of it's a 4% damage multiplier, its own damage multiplier, while you have Fortify. And this is, I believe, it's its own separate multiplier. Yeah, because you know how I know it's its own separate multiplier? Because I think I checked this. Let's double check this here real quick. If we go over to damage while fortified, if this moves, then it means it's multiplicative within this damage point here. But I don't think it's going to move. So let me press this here. So that was 60% before, and it is 60.1% still. So this means, irrefutably, this is its own damage multiplier. Except that I clicked the wrong one. So let's try it again. There we go. Yes, okay. Still true. Still true. All right. Counteroffensive, very good. Very good stat. Some people are sleeping on it, and I forgot about it for a long time. And I am fortified most of the time, thanks to the Paragon board. +3 heavy-handed for 30% increased critical strike. You want to see what this does to my critical strike damage if I don't use this. So remember, it's almost 600% there. Let's look at this. Show you how powerful this is. All the way down to 436. Put that on. 516. And then almost 600 with all 6 points. So for the sword build, of course, you're going to get things like hamstring, whatever. I'm not going to talk about the sword slashing variation of Whirlwind. There's so many different build guides already out there, and a lot of them are really good. I like the max roll in-game guide for the sword build almost perfectly, except for no ground stomp. But for the mace build, we're going to take Wallop, which would also be a great thing to have +3 on the amulet for, if you found it. Is conditional. But I believe this is, especially because it's war, this is straight up 15% multiplier across the board. Its own damage bucket, so to speak. Then concussion for extra chance of stun. So we have much higher stun uptime with mace play. So I still like this aspect even with sword play, but it's more reliable. With concussion and using an actual mace, because maces themselves, of course, give you a chance to. I believe it gives a chance to stun. Oh, maybe it's one-hand mace. Actually, no, it doesn't give a chance to stun. That's weird. I thought it gave a chance to stun. So I am using a two-handed mace and then got two-handed axe expertise. I messed around with trying two-handed sword expertise and getting bleed in there. Trust me, the unique chest didn't work at all. Disembowel seemed to be working way less than often. I tried it with Berserk Ripper. Again, the unique chest, it's bugged or something. It doesn't work unless you're actually using a two-handed sword. It's very strange. I read into it. It doesn't seem like it should be that way, but it is. So I do not recommend trying to make bleeds work into this build. Just really not worth it. And moving on down, we got, of course, Wrath the Berserker. Sometimes take points over here, but couldn't yet. And then Unbridled Rage, of course. Recommendation to anyone just trying to get into Whirlwind. You don't quite have all of the aspects and things ready to go. Unconstrained is really good. Unconstrained, especially if you can get this aspect with Unconstrained. You'll do less damage, but it'll smooth out the build. It'll feel better, certainly feel better for you. So that's it for the passives. Now we have Paragon. We'll open up widescreen for this. Right, so this is linked in the description as part of the build guide, and this almost perfectly follows the max roll in-game Whirlwind build. I looked at Rob's Paragon board. I looked at it pretty closely. I did spend a good 20-30 minutes on that, comparing and contrasting them. Honestly, I think the max roll board came out better. There were a few things. You know, Rob's a terrific content creator, but I did see a couple of weird things on his Paragon board, like some unnecessary intellect points taken where he didn't have to do that without really saving anything in return. But aside from, you know, just a couple tiny minor things that don't really matter that much, basically it was a very good board. Both of them are very good boards. So Rob does have even a Mace specific guide on his. You can check that out. He has a whole YouTube video on it too. But he did not min-max his as far as I did. And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I went ahead and made this video. Plus, I wanted to get that eye candy out there for you guys, of course. So for glyphs, we're going to be doing territorial. So increased damage to close enemies, and you know, I kind of talked bad about close enemies before, but you know, there's no other glyph that's going to give me damage otherwise. Of course, everybody's going to use exploit, terrific, and level these. Most of these are leveled, or half of these are leveled to 21, like exploit and wrath are, but some of them are just to level 15 or 16. Imbiber is the highest flat damage, or increase to increase for the biggest damage bucket, the highest one. So good to level that one up to 21 too, if possible. And then we move up here. Now, this is where Disembowel goes. However, I couldn't get anything out of the bleeds to work very well, so the next best option is this one, which is Undaunted for, again, more increased damage. Of course. Then we have Wrath, which is just terrific, just a huge amount, and the extra fury back. And then Martial, which everybody takes, of course. After casting Shout skill, the active cooldown of every other Shout skill, very important to take Martial for a Whirlwind build, especially. Now, I think one of the only real differences between my build or my Paragon setup and some other people is these 2 points here. I went ahead and took these 2 points. And I think the other one had points here, yeah. Damage reduction against vulnerable enemies, that small of a threshold seems pretty bad. This gives 10 more strength for 2 points, and some resistances. I know nobody cares about resistances, but I mean, it is 10 all resistance, so I mean, it's something. But really, it's all about the 10 strength for those 2 points, more than anything. I felt like that was a good place to use it. You could get +4 max fury, maybe some more dex if you were trying to hit a threshold on that. But you can see that I'm still nowhere near hitting it on any of these rare notables for the 6th board or the 5th board, and then I gotta go all the way back to the 4th board to have everything met. I barely have this one here. So you definitely, I think whether you meet the stat threshold or not is going to depend on Havoc, so pay attention to that rare node, and you obviously want to get the bonus for this one. Very powerful. So there is the Paragon board. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about any of that. I may forget exactly what I was doing, but yeah, please just follow the guide. The stat weights, yeah, I already went over all the stat weights. So we looked at the Paragon board, we looked at the passive skill tree, and then we looked at all the stat weights and some of the damage buckets. That's basically all I wanted to talk about, with a little bit of a showcase. I'll go ahead and give my final thoughts on this. So yeah, got to reiterate, This is a fun build. Of course, you know, you might be sitting there maybe a little bit bored already if you're somebody who's raced to the end game like I did, and you're just thinking of something to do. See how big you can get your Whirlwind crits. People are seeing how big they can get the Hoda crits. Why not see how big you can get the Whirlwind crits? It can be a lot of fun to see those huge numbers. And of course, if you have a moment like I did in the opening scene of this video, there's nothing more satisfying than that, than seeing that unfold before your eyes. Truly an incredible feeling to see that. And then of course, just the loot explosion is really great. What I might do next is go back to the more sword play and then try to see what I can do with pushing a Whirlwind. I think I'm going to test that out a little bit. Don't think I'm going to make a new character. Not really that interested in trying out a different character, to be honest. But yeah, one more time. Don't recommend this build for pushing. Don't really recommend this build for anything except the eye candy that it gives. And it is fun to see how hard you can push it, and it does help me. It did help me get a better understanding about how some of the damage multipliers all work out, because it is kind of a complicated system, how all of these damage multipliers stack up to one another. I can almost see a 4 million crit. I think I've seen up to like 3.8 million crit, authentic, non-exploit crit in the game. But I haven't quite seen 4 million yet. Maybe it's happened, I just missed it. I don't know. Let me know what your biggest Whirlwind crit is in the comment section below if you have any questions. I appreciate you watching this video, this little guide showcase thing, whatever you want to call it. And stay tuned for another Whirlwind video that is going to be more, you know, it's going to be more along the lines of min-maxing the whole sword bleed play and aiming more at higher tier Nightmare Dungeons, possibly actually pushing them, probably more oriented towards speed farming the highest Nightmare Dungeon that you can speed farm, more or less. A more well-balanced Barbarian build, for sure. I'll see you guys around. Bye.